as you all have read or heard or watched on the tube or got on your iPod, our state is faced with a $1.2 billion shortfall and falling more. The 1.2 is based on the Council on Revenue's last estimate back in January, when they said they revised downward their forecast for tax revenues for the current year from 1.5% to 2.5%. And for those of us in the peanut gallery who've been watching this all along, we're going, no way, Jose. It ain't going to be minus 2.5%. And certainly, tax collections through the first 7 months of the fiscal year through January that we got recorded in February, overall we're down minus 6.7%, all general fund revenues. And when I say and falling even more, that doesn't take into account the administration's juggling of the books, if you will, by not refunding almost $275 million in state income tax refunds until next fiscal year. So if you add that back in, we're down by almost about 9 to 10% in tax collections through the first 7 months. And you know, some of the people on the council, this very revered, if you will, Council on Revenues, and I think it's a lot of hocus pocus for many of you who don't know that the Constitution requires the Council on Revenues to forecast state tax revenues upon which the state budget is then constructed. We all have to live with it. The administration has to live with it. The legislature has to live with it. We, the people, have to live with it. And it's their forecast which is driving all of the gnashing of teeth at the state legislature. Unfortunately, what happened, and I can give you a little background, a little amusement maybe. Unfortunately, what happened last year was that people didn't think it was so bad. You know, it wasn't so bad. You know, we're going to pull out of it. In fact, the state economists in May of 2008, right after ATA and Aloha Airlines and Molokai Ranch and Weyerhaeuser closing down, said, oh, this was just a blip on the radar. It'll come back by the end of the year. This was 2008, May. And we all know what happened in September and October of 2008. The market crashed, burned, and 2009 was one of the worst years that we've seen in the stock market, period. That, of course, created the underlying weakness to what we're faced with now, and I tell people, it's going to be a long time coming. They go, what do you mean? I said, well, as long as people don't have the consumer confidence necessary to shop in the market, buy goods, and therefore create demand for inventory, we're not going to make it back. We're seeing a few signs of it in the Midwest and the far west or east United States, a little bit of the manufacturing coming back, but it's a trickle. And until manufacturing and inventories are restored, we're not going to see the kind of consumer confidence important to our industries here in Hawaii, which is, of course, leisure travel. Certainly, Hawaii was not hit as hard in the housing market as many other places, but foreclosures are still happening, and they're still rising here in Hawaii, and that's mainly because the anticipatory buying in the market, especially in the residential market, in fear that people were going to get priced out of the housing market, is taking its toll, and that is also going to have an impact on the economy and therefore consumer confidence here in Hawaii. But let me continue the saga. What happened last year in 2009, we began the calendar year 2009 thinking, wow, we're not doing so bad, we have lots of money. And the tax department, in fact, was very proud of the fact that it collected $360 million in delinquent taxes. Unfortunately, when that got transmitted to the people that handle the money, B&F, Budget and Finance, and the Department of Accounting and General Services, they counted that money twice. And it wasn't discovered until the end of the fiscal year of 2009. $360 million, poof, gone. And that's because we were so proud, the tax department was so proud, they put up a separate column that said $360 million collected in delinquent taxes, but they included it in the total, but they didn't tell everybody it was in the total. So that's how it got double counted. And for a period there, in early part of this fiscal year, about August of '09 and September of '09, the state could not pay its bills. I don't know if any of you was a vendor to the state, but payments were anywhere from 60 to 90 days behind. They weren't being paid at all. So, you know, between that and the fact that people are waiting for their payment, the lack of confidence got even worse. People said, how can we trust state government? Why do we want to sell something to the state government if they can't pay their bills? Well, fast forward to where we are today at the beginning of the legislative session this year, 2010, and we're looking at closing the books next July, not this July, but June 30th, 2011, with 1.2 billion, probably more like 1.5 billion, 500 million short. Now, let's say we look at your checkbook and you go, my gosh, by the end of this year, I'm not going to have any money. In fact, I'm going to owe more money than into my checking account. What do you do? What do you do? Now, for those of you who have been up to the Capitol, and I heard some people were talking about visits to the various legislators, the Pavlovian response for legislators is raise taxes. And especially the general excise tax, because they see it as only another penny. It's only another penny. You know, what are you getting upset about? And so we've been there in the hustings trying to educate and say, it's not the same thing as a retail sales tax, it's not another penny, that in fact our general excise tax is so insidious that it truly adds to the cost of living and doing business here in Hawaii to the extent that it could drive many businesses out of business, and with them, the employment that our people need. So it's scary. And I kid you not, it is a challenge, especially to deal with legislators who have no business background, who tell you, well, you know, we've cut everything possible. In fact, you heard the Senate President tell small business Hawaii, there is no waste in government. Wrong crowd. Wrong crowd. And so, you know, you just know that the public perception is still there that government should make a greater effort to reduce spending. Okay, we have that perception. We have the perception that, you know, we can't do without all these public services that we've been accustomed to. And unfortunately, that's true. We found new ways to pay for programs that we never had before, to the extent that we've added on more and more of a burden to us as taxpayers. Now, it may not have been a general tax increase, and in other cases, yes, there were very specific taxes that were increased. But the point of the matter is that government is much larger today than it was 20 years ago. One of the things we talked about, Mary, are you here with your, I forgot my flash drive, but she has the documents back there, I'm sure. But one of the things we put out for our membership was a white paper to say, the state's not all that much up the creek, that in fact the state has money. And what we pointed out in a little table is the fact that over the period from 1995 to this year's biennial budget, which will end in 2011, the percentage of our state operating budget approved by the legislature, not the governor's budget, which is just a proposal, but actually passed by the legislature, has grown insofar as programs funded out of what we call special funds. These are funds that are beneficiaries of little earmarked fees and taxes that often gets overlooked once enacted. So you say, well, what are we talking about? In 1995, the 1995-97 biennial budget, special funds other than transportation funds, other than those for the highways and the airports and harbors, accounted for about 11.6% of the state operating budget. By the time we approved the budget last session for this biennium, that had risen to over 17%. That represents roughly $3.6 billion, or 3 times the amount of the shortfall we're facing for this biennial